In the previous section, we covered advanced backup and recovery of vSphere 6 deployments. In this section, we are going to cover advanced vSphere 6.x security. Specifically, we're going to take a look at the ESXi firewall, which is almost like the last line of defense. We will look at it in extensive detail, both from the perspective of the command line, as well as adding new services, and from the perspective of the vSphere web client. We will then look at two key vSphere 6.x security documents, one being the hardening guide and the other the security guide. We will look at the key feature of vSphere 6.x, which is a huge advance over anything that had come before, is the vSphere 6 single sign-on SSO architecture. A tremendous leap forward, very simple to understand, and yet very, very sophisticated and secure. We will look at the nitty-gritty of certificate management. We will look at what one can do with certificate management from a vSphere web client perspective, as well as we will look into the various CLIs that exist to manage certificates, because certificates are one of the key aspects of the single sign-on architecture, and all communication between various vSphere components is all encrypted and authorized and authenticated based on certificates. We will look at command line interfaces for vSphere 6.x, and for all the topics above, we will have extensive labs. In this video, we are going to cover vSphere 6.x Firewall Management. We are going to take a look at the vSphere 6.x firewall from a web client perspective. We will look at the vSphere 6.x firewall command line, the ESX CLI network firewall command structure, and we will look at service management, especially the firewall services and the rule sets, adding in new rule sets where they don't exist, enabling them, disabling them, and see what they come up like on the web client. So here we are once again logged in into vSphere web client. Let's just take a quick look to see where we are. So I have the vCenter 192.168.0.220, and it's working in linked mode with a second vCenter at the address .221, which is managing a second site, which is the Pact Publishing Site 2. So this is my headquarters site for Pact Publishing. So in this vCenter and in this data center, we're running two ESXi hosts. One is 192.168.0.200, and we have this one which is 192.168.0.201, and they're not working in clustered mode. What we are interested to look at in this video is the firewall. So we're going to take a look at the firewall properties, the ESXi firewall properties for the host 192.168.0.201. And so I click on this, and I then click on Manage, and I click on the security profile. And that basically gives me the firewall incoming connections. So we can take a look at this. We can look at the DNS client. So incoming connections are allowed UDP on port 53 from any IP address. We can look at a few others. SSH server, for example, runs on port 22, and again, it allows connections from all IP addresses. Of course, this can be changed, which you probably already know. So we can actually change that by looking at the allowed IP addresses, and then instead of allowing connections from any IP addresses, we can remove the check mark from there and then enter a comma separated list of IP addresses which are allowed. We're going to leave this alone because I think you already know how to look at this. And we keep going. You can see the outgoing connections, which is right here, outgoing connections, and then you have the services which are running or stopped, and of course before that we had the incoming, outgoing, and the services. So this is the basic configuration that is available in the vSphere web client when you actually go into the host, ESXi host, and then click on Manage System Security Profile. And of course from there you can manipulate your services, your lockdown mode, and so on. Now, what we are going to do is to look at what one needs to do to the VMware ESXi host firewall when a new service needs to be installed, something that doesn't exist in here. How does one actually go about doing that? So we are going to now go and look at the ESXi shell for this host 192.168.0.201. So here I have secured shelled into 192.168.0.201. I have a putty session in here, and let's do a cd to /etc/vmware. When I list in here, you can see there are many files in here, and the one directory that we're interested in is the firewall directory. So I'll do a cd to firewall. Let's take a look, see what we have in there. It looks like we have two XML files. There's the service.xml file and a vr2c.xml file. Also, let's do a long list here, and you can see that the two XML files are read-only. Now, if we do a cat of the vr2c.xml file, we see that we have the standard XML format, which starts with the tag config root and ends with, of course, the /config root. There's a service ID in there, and there's an ID name in there, replication to cloud traffic. And by looking at it, you can see there's a service ID, there's a rule ID in the outbound direction using the TCP protocol on the ports starting at 10,000 to 10,010 is what this rule actually defines. The rule ID of 000 actually defines it. Also, is the rule enabled and is the rule required? So just keep this in mind. So intuitively, it looks like that this XML text is actually defining a service with the service ID of 0, which is called replication to cloud traffic, with certain rules in it. And there's only one rule in here, which is this rule here, which basically says that this rule is for the outbound direction using TCP protocol, and it's valid for all ports from 10,000 to 10,010. And then there's a second piece of it which says, is this rule enabled and is this required? And while it's enabled is true, required is false. So intuitively, it kind of means that we have defined a service here to the firewall, and it's allowing outbound connections using TCP to ports 10,000 and 10,010, and it is not required, but it is enabled out of the box. Now, what does this actually mean? Well, let's take a look at, we'll do a more on service.xml. Now, this is the firewall configuration information, and again starts with the tag config root, and at the end of the file it will be a /config root to end that tag. So this file, it looks like it says known and blessed services. This is a spelling error in version 6 here, looks like. Anyways, so let's take a look at one of these services. So these are your blessed services. So one of obviously the blessed services is our secure shell server. Inbound direction with TCP allows us on port 22 to actually connect. It is enabled out of the box, and it's required to be true as well. So this is what opens up the firewall for port 22 when the SSH service is actually enabled through the vSphere client or through the DC UI, basically, right? So initially it's a secure shell, as we know. At installation it's not enabled. So the DC UI shell and the SSH server has to be enabled. Okay, so it looks like this is the format that we're looking for to put in new services. So I'm going to escape out of this and basically do a quit. And after clearing the screen, let's look at some of the commands that are available in the ESX CLI command line interface. So ESX CLI network firewall, and when I hit the enter key, we'll get all the options available. So there is an option to list and update the firewall rule sets. So let's just look at the firewall rule sets. Intuitively speaking, again, it seems like a rule set is a set of firewall rules. Let's see if that is true. So ESX and we key in rule set, and it'll say list. Let's look at the list option, and we list them. And it seems that there are many of these in here, and these are there's a vSphere client and so on, and we can pipe this to more to see if we can see the secure shell. And you can see the secure shell server is enabled as true, which we saw also by looking at the XML as it existed. But this is the running configuration. That was configuration in the XML format. Obviously, this is derived from that. Now, I do a Control C out of this. Let's look at some of the other options we have. So we can list the rule sets, and obviously we can set the rule sets as well, which we can do, which we'll try and do later as well. So you can enable it. You need a rule set ID to enable it, and allowed all means allow connections from all IP addresses, in which case you have to define an IP list as specified here in the allowed IP. Okay. Now let's look at the rules in a given rule set. So we will say rule set rule, and it'll probably ask us to put a list in, and we list the rule sets. And so you can see these are all the various rule sets that are actually available, and we pipe these to more so that we can actually have a good idea what this means. So again, concentrating on the SSH server, inbound direction TCP protocol, destination port is not defined, so basically at port 22 only are we allowed to have this connection. And you're probably familiar with iSCSI as well. So here's iSCSI at port 3260, which is a normal DNS would be at port 53, and here we are. DNS port 53 is open, DHCP is open at 68, and 123 is obviously the NTP client, that's the NTP standard port, and so on. And of course you do know that fault tolerance uses some secure and some unsecured ports as well, HTTP and HTTPS ports here. So I'm going to Control C out of this as well. So now let's look at a situation where we have, for example, a completely new service that has to be created. So how do we actually add a completely new service into this? So by doing an lsal, we see there are two XML files in here, and there was a vr2c.xml file. Actually, that vr2c.xml file was created in a previous session automatically by the system when I initiated the replication to the cloud in my demonstration in a lab earlier of how one can use a replication appliance to replicate to a vCloud Air, a remote cloud. So that was created automatically. Let's see how we can actually create one of our own. Some kind of a packed publishing service, perhaps. Let's see how we do that. First thing to do would be to make sure that we can actually read and write with this. We are to see, there are different ways of doing this, but this is the way I do it. Shimon to let's say 644 vr2c.xml. All right, then I do a vi and say packed pub.xml, some kind of a packed pub service. I actually put vr2c.xml first, and then the packed pub.xml, and we then count of these. So I do a 16 YY, so I've yanked 16 lines, and then what I do is I put the colon, I say next, so it takes me to the other file that I specified, which is my packed pub.xml. I do a P for a put, and that whole template or that old service is copied across. So I'm at the config root again. The tag is starts here, of course, and then ends here. And what we've done is we've copied the entire file that was in the vr2c.xml into packedpub.xml. What we're going to do now is to attempt to see how we can change this to modify it for packed pub. So I do a CW for change word and say my service ID is 12,000. Hit escape. I will change the name of this and call it, I can change the word here, change word, packed pub to cloud traffic. I hit escape. Keep the first rule in there, it's fine. I can actually change this to say change word again to 12,000 and escape and go back in here again, change word to 12,000, say let's say 002, escape, and we can change, instead of being it enabled, I say change word and make it false. We can use the CLI to actually enable that. And we have now created the XML for the service ID of 12,000 for packed pub to cloud traffic at port 12,000 to 12,002. I hit escape, I do a colon, and I do a right quit. Now let's do an ls-al, and you can see we have this packed pub.xml file there. It has the same permissions as before. We can obviously change that. And what we're going to do now is we will ESX CLI network firewall rule set list, and we can see we don't see anything which is called packed pub to cloud traffic here at all. What one needs to do is we have to, the firewall is already loaded, so we don't have to load it, we have to refresh it. So we refresh the firewall and we retrieve the rule set again, and you can see right at the end here there's packed pub to cloud traffic is now available. So what has happened is that it read all the XML files in that directory, and that's how it found out all about those services. So here's the packed pub to cloud traffic there. Of course it is not enabled right now because it says false. So what we have to do is to enable this. The way that's done is network firewall rule set. Let's do it the step-by-step way, and we say set, and we hit enter again. We need to enable it, and we need to specify the rule set ID. So we need to enable it, and we need to specify the rule set ID. And what we do is to rule set set -e true -r, and the rule set ID is, because it's actually two words, packed pub to cloud traffic. Do a cut and paste here, copy and paste rather, and then I go back in here and I do this. Okay, once we've entered that, let's do a rule set list again, and we should see that the packed pub to cloud traffic rule set is now enabled, and because this is now says it's true. What we need to do now is to switch back to the vSphere web client and see how this shows up in the settings for that host. So we're back in the vSphere web client. We're looking at that host 201 that we just secured shelled into, and to which we had created that new XML file, the packed pub XML file for ports 12,000 to, I think it was 12,002. I haven't refreshed it, so we will click on refresh so that this user interface is refreshed, and we see that we have packed pub to cloud traffic at 12,000 TCP from all IP addresses, or rather in this case it's two all IP addresses enabled. That's because we enabled that rule set. Now of course when we disable that rule set, then what happens is that this would actually go away, and we will switch back to there, and instead of rule set true, we will say rule set false. Okay, just to verify it right here, we will do a rule set list, and we see that packed pub to cloud traffic is now false. We will then switch back to our web client, and we see that it's here because we have not done a refresh yet. I click on the refresh symbol up there, and we should see that packed up to cloud should not be available. As you can see, it used to be here and it's gone away. So this is how one actually adds a service, enables it, disables it, and so on within the ESXi host for the firewall. Obviously, from a security perspective, the firewall is really key because this is the firewall for the ESXi host. Very quickly, we can go through some of the other options up here in the firewall. So ESX CLI network firewall. You can see you can load the firewall module and resets. We can unload the firewall module, and we can get the firewall status. So let's go do and get a firewall status get. And it tells us that the default action is drop, which basically means that obviously rather that in case there is no rule that matches the traffic, then the default action is to drop it, which is obviously the way the firewall should run. Of course, one can actually set it to not to drop as well, to allow it as well. Enabled is true, so the firewall is loaded and is actually functioning, and it is loaded, which is true as well. So you can load or unload, and you can refresh it. And with the set option, as you can see here, with the set option, you can set firewall enabled status and the default action. And let's just take a quick look at that. We just key in set, and it says you need a parameter which is -- enabled true or false, and then you need the default action. Let's just make sure we know the syntax for the default action, -- default action, enter, and it says -e enabled. So set to true to enable the firewall, set to false to disable the firewall. We saw that already. And for the default action, you set to true to allow it to pass, or set to false to allow it to drop. It's not very intuitive, but really, if you wanted to drop traffic, then set it to false. If you wanted to pass traffic, then you set it to true. So with that, we come to the end of this lab, where we learned how to add a new service, enabled it, and then look at it from the vSphere web client as well as how to load, unload, refresh, and to set the various default actions and the enablement of the firewall itself. In this video, we covered very extensively the ESXi version 6.0 firewall. In the next video, we will cover vSphere 6.x single sign-on architecture, a key feature of the vSphere 6.x deployment. I look forward to seeing you on that next video.